I'm realizing how much of my memories had to do with not having a lot of resources, but it wasn't like we were poor. I just think, like most middle class families, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of like, you'll get a toy on your birthday, on Christmas. You've got this many quarters at the arcade, right? Like it wasn't just like whatever you want. And so it made you really pause and think like, what am I going to put these quarters in?
Through limitations comes creativity.
I think so. I do think that's a real thing of it makes your brain focus on what about that thing really sticks out, right? There's the breadth of it, but really you start without realizing it talking about what is it about that aesthetic, that one experience that's peak that for me, right? And it does make you think about that.
If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment about the episode. And if you're watching on Spotify or listening on a traditional podcast platform, please follow, rate us 5 stars, and leave a review if you would be so kind. Thank you. Welcome to the Way to Know You podcast, Season 2, Episode 24. My name is Nick Rounds, and I will be your host. My next guest has been in the games industry for almost 20 years. He's worked for companies such as Electronic Arts, Zynga, Kixeye, Humble Bundle, and most recently, Netflix Games. He's also been an indie dev, creating the indie game Ollie & Flip with his good friend Glenn Song. When he's not busy playing defense against his son's mean jump shot, he's spending time with his partner Petra and dying continuously in Elden Ring. Rodrigo Aguilar.
Hello.
Wait, I know you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. To be fair, I think everybody's dying in Elden Ring. Are people still playing it? I mean, I feel like I'm super late to Elden Ring. Like I waited a while to get it, and then I finally got it, and been playing it little by little. But
I think the hardcore people are definitely still doing like the builds that are different and or weird at this point. But I mean, you get to a game when you get to it. I mean, you and I are both working professionals in the video games industry, and it's always hard to find time. You were talking about that earlier about like how it's hard to relax and play games at the same time in the same way you used to. Do you want to expand on that?
Well, just the fact that when you, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this, talking about games careers, but when you get into it and you're passionate about video games, there's something about seeing them made and thinking about deeply about making them that you can't just relax into the experience. I mean, you can, but it's rare. You're sitting there analyzing and thinking about it, and when you're just after a full day of working and thinking about video games, you just can't go back to relaxing the way you used to. To say nothing of just getting older and now having kids, and you just don't have the time span to do it. So that's the other thing.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
We're not old youngins slamming Mountain Dew Cold Red and
just being able to have that time, and the attention, yeah. And I miss it. I miss being able to sit and play video games and get deeply into them. But
being a worthless lump, that's okay. You're making them now, so
yeah,
it's all good.
Maxis mug.
A shameless plug.
Yeah,
we'll get to very shortly.
Yes.
But before we get into your origins at Maxis and Electronic Arts, I want to talk about your nerd origin story or your video game origin story. Somebody asked me this question recently, so I'm curious. What moment or moments led you to becoming a video game geek?
Yeah, those are good. That's a good question. The two that come up immediately is being a little kid in Mexico City. And my dad taking me to an arcade. It was an arcade in Mexico City, near us in the same block, called Arcoiris, which means rainbow. And just taking me there and seeing those games. A lot of that aesthetic is still very much burned into my psyche. I can show you my small Pac-Man or Donkey Kong little arcade machines, but that aesthetic is very much still in there. Going to my cousin's house, cousins plural, like each one had a different one. They would have the Atari, they would have the Intellivision. We couldn't afford one at home, and so that feeling of going and playing them there was a mystique about them. They're interesting and they're interactive and they're electronic. So that, but also when I came to the States, so I came to the States in the mid '80s from Mexico. And there, we certainly got a lot of the culture and video games and movies, but not all of it. And so getting hit by that, and it was right around the time that the Nintendo Entertainment System came out.
Mm-hmm.
And so a brand new kid in a culture that I very much wanted to be immersed in. And again, my parents couldn't afford to buy these things, but going to each friend's house and playing those games, and this kid would have Punch Out, that kid would have Rad Racer, that kid would have Muscle. Well, what is Muscle? The wrestling game. A friend bringing home brand new. It just came out. Super Mario Brothers 2. I think all of that stuff, right? The aesthetic. It was the being hit with the now the nostalgia, but being hit by that culture, the video game culture as it was starting. All of those things really were in it, and I was always a very creative kid. I was the kid that was drawing a lot and was good at drawing, and but I remember going to that arcade, playing a few of those games, including Q*bert. If anybody remembers Q*bert, and coming home and drawing it. But I remember I at that point I wasn't drawing to just draw Q*bert. I was drawing to be like to make it work. I cut out the Q*bert and made the little squares on the side, and I remember thinking like, how would I make this move, right? And it was weird because it wouldn't be till like years later that I would even start to comprehend that that's an actual, like somebody makes it. Like for a while when you're a kid, there's TV shows and toys and whatever, and you just take them for granted. You're just getting the main, the experience of it. But it's only later on that you break it down. We're like, well, who made this and how did they make it? And so I even then I wasn't making that connection, but I remember that being a thing where as a kid, even though I was a kid that would draw a lot, I would make stuff, right? And I was saying earlier about not being able to afford stuff. I would go home and make toys. It's kind of weird, but like I would again in Mexico we had these giant robots from Japan that didn't quite make it here. So here you got like Voltron.
Shogun Warriors.
Yeah, but you got Lion Voltron, which I had Vehicle Voltron and Maxis Z on that side.
I remember that's the one thing about you that I thought was really funny is that you don't really care about the Go Lion Voltron. You only care about Vehicle Voltron.
No, yeah, exactly.
What's funny is I never actually owned Lion Voltron as a kid. I only had the Vehicle one.
Yeah.
But I still think the Lion one's iconic. But it's funny to me that you like the Vehicle one. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Of those early games, specifically the one, because I know you rattled off a bunch of the games that your friends had, but were there any specific games in the arcade, or even the games that you played at your friend's place that like really still stick with you today, besides Q*bert?
I mean, for no really main reason. I think it was just the ones that I would approach. I remember, I'm realizing how much of my memories had to do with not having a lot of resources, but it wasn't like we were poor. I just think, like most middle class families, right? Yeah. Like there's a lot of like, you'll get a toy on your birthday, on Christmas. You've got this many quarters at the arcade, right? Like it wasn't just like whatever you want. And so it made you really pause and think like, what am I going to put these quarters in? So, so I remember the ones that I would get either that I would really be interested in, but I wasn't good at, but I wanted to be good at, or I just happened to be able to play a little bit longer in those arcade games, right? So the two that stand out are Donkey Kong, like the arcade cabinet of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., that aesthetic, that Nintendo 1980s aesthetic is great in my head. Mm-hmm. And there was one called Jungle King. and there was multiple variants of it, because back in the day they would bootleg each other's chips and make different versions. So it was basically Tarzan. But I remember being super intrigued by it because they had 3 screens, like most arcade games at the time. You'd have to have one screen. If you beat it, you go to the next screen. If you beat it, you go to the next screen, and then you basically cycle over and over. And so you have to they had these swinging vine mechanics that you have to go through. And I remember being really trying to do it and thinking that I could get more play out of it. But I was really intrigued by that mechanic. So there you go. Yeah, they made a few versions. So yeah, and so that bottom left one, when he's like that little, that one is that you start there, and he'll even do the Tarzan call, and then you have to time the vines. It's a really cool mechanic. And then the second screen, you have to jump over boulders. And then the third one, I think you have to dodge spears, and then you won. You keep going. But yeah, those are the ones that stick out. And again, there wasn't a particular thing about them. It's more that thing in your head that sticks out the most.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a similar thing with you as you, of just like growing up middle class, and like the toys that you got for your birthday or Christmas, that's mainly what you kind of had to use and play all the time. Like I never owned Castle Grayskull. It wasn't until just a random neighbor kid had a garage sale and they were getting rid of Castle Grayskull for like super cheap. That's the only reason I got it. Like I was missing like the throne and a bunch of other stuff. But I was still stoked to get it. So yeah, I never owned any vehicles. I never owned any play sets except for the ones that either my grandma bought me or we got from a garage sale. So I'm right there with you about that one.
Everybody grows up with that one kid. So if you grew up with Star Wars, they had every Star Wars. If you grew up with Transformers, they had all of them. If you grew up with whatever, right? They had all of them. And so you had a way to sample those, but then you knew that you have to be very particular. Which one are you going to get? Because you can't, if you're going to play by yourself, which one of these Transformers or whatever you're going to play at home? And so it was always a decision point, right? Of wanting to get into it, but having a limited way into it.
But through limitations comes creativity.
I think so. I do think that's a real thing. Of it makes your brain focus on what about that thing really sticks out, right? There's the breadth of it, but really you start without realizing it talking about what is it about that aesthetic, that one experience that's peak that for me, right? And it does make you think about that.
Makes sense. So your first games job was over at Maxis, specifically under the umbrella of Electronic Arts. But before that, you were doing graphic design for a medical company. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I was after high school, I only had a little bit of college before I wanted to go off and do my own thing. I started working a lot, so I was building computers and whatever. But my way in work-wise was always the visual, creative, graphic design, illustration path. That was always my main way in. So pre-video games, it was a lot of graphic design, web design, when web design was, it still is, but back, I'm talking about late 90s, that kind of stuff, or early aughts. What do we call it? What do we call that decade?
Yeah, that's early aughts.
Yeah.
Who wants to
I don't know if people are actually calling it the aughts or people call it the early 2000s.
I don't know. If you're older, if you were born in the 1900s, apparently you're a boomer and or.
I know. It's funny. I heard people say like, "Oh, boomers!" Like, whoa. It's a very specific, generation.
Yeah.
But yeah. So my path was that I was doing a lot of graphic design, but then I started doing a lot of illustration because I was working for a company that was just doing medical training. When the .com boom happened, right? So the early 2000s, everybody wanted to get on the internet and do something. Everybody was getting VC funding to do something. And I happened to land, I had been doing some graphical work when I moved out on my own. So taking a step back, I was living taking a step back. When I came from Mexico, I came to San Diego. That's where I finished high school, etc. But then right after high school, we moved, my family and I moved to Texas. We're in San Antonio for a bit. When I moved out on my own, I just went, I'm going to go back to California, but not quite just completely back somewhere completely new. But if I run into trouble, I could just go down to somewhere else that I know. So I went to LA. I just randomly picked LA, drove all the way out. And so my first jobs were in LA doing a lot of Photoshop stuff, a lot of Illustrator stuff, a lot of graphic design stuff, and that started to get into web design, etc. And then in the dot-com boom, I got a job doing graphic design for this place called medschool.com. They were trying to teach medical students stuff via the internet. And so I started doing a lot of graphic design, a lot of UI design and art. Then it started to get into like, well, help us with the education programs, right? So the actual inside there's some graphical elements, and then I started. They wanted to hire medical illustrators to do this stuff, and I showed that I can actually do some of the illustrations. So I started supplementing that too. So I started doing, hearts and livers and that all kind of stuff. But it was all Flash based, and so it was a combination of like, all right, it's now becoming audio visual, right? It's not just like here's a web page or here's a print thing, which was my earlier work. It was like now it's online, it's interactive, and so then I was starting to learn a lot of Flash. And again, in my video game loving way, that I never thought I'd be able to make games because it was all art. Art is not, like just the art assets is not quite programming and all this other stuff. But once I saw Flash, then I was like, oh, wait, I could do that on the side. I would just go home and boot up Flash and try to make a Flash game. But yeah, so that was the pre-video game setup was me doing a lot of art illustration, graphic design for interactive stuff, while at home trying to learn how to program, which was it's tougher going from the right brain, going left brain, right, and just by yourself. There was no YouTube tutorial, right? So just trying to teach myself Flash at the time. So that was the setup for that. And anybody that I could talk to at the time, I would say, let's start a video game company. Let's make a video game. And I had no clue what that meant. I just knew at some point we should be able to make a game, right? Like make something. And so that was always what I was looking for, and just talking to people about it.
EA Maxis was your first games job. How did you break into Maxis? Just like with showing the portfolio of what you had made and like all your passion on the side of what you were creating?
So it was a bit of luck because at the time, like I said, I had no clue what the game industry was like, where it was at, who do you talk to about it. I just knew that maybe I could go. I've always been just hands-on. Like if I want to do it, I was talking earlier, like making my own toys, right? Like if I can't have a toy, I'll just go grab some cardboard and start making it. I could talk about this later too. Like that's an instinct that has been good, but also I've been learned to not necessarily always flex that or exercise that muscle, right? There's a lot of like delegation and teamwork that you also need to take into account. But anyway, just that idea of just jumping on and trying to make something, I was always trying to do. And so I got lucky because a friend that I had happened to help with a UI thing that he was trying to do. And then I kept talking, just like everybody else, let's make games. Happened to have a friend that was working at Maxis. And she casually said, hey, we're about to launch The Sims 2. We're making a website, and we'd like to make a couple of Flash games. Do you happen to know anybody who knows how to make Flash games, but it could also do the art, like one-stop shop? I'll just give you this project or two, and then just go make me a small Flash game for. not quite marketing, but kind of marketing or adjacent to the launch.
Yeah.
And that was it. I was in the middle of trying to quit getting out of medical illustration because I knew that I went the wrong path, right? Like I had not been building this career making medical illustration that I did not want to be doing, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next. And so I was trying to go back to school, whatever. And all of a sudden, I get this call: "Hey, would you be interested in making some Flash games for Maxis at EA?" And it was just like, yes, like absolutely. What do you need? Whatever. And it was up here in the Bay Area, so Redwood Shores, where EA is at. And I was down in LA, in Culver City. And so I had to do a little bit back and forth. I to your question about like, did I have a portfolio? I had to put one together from all those little Flash bits that I had made. By the way, I didn't even put Flash games. I wasn't making Flash games at the time, that we had like Newgrounds and stuff like that. I didn't even do that, right? I wasn't fully making games. I just knew that from the art side of things, what can I contribute and get it going to go make a game, right?
Right.
So I put together all these prototypes that I did, like these pseudo 2D grids, and I had recreated. So when I was a kid, my dad had brought back from the States remember the LCD, the Nintendo Lock and Key? What do they call them? It was
Game and Watch.
Game and Watch. He had brought back Donkey Kong Jr. Game and Watch, and so I love that thing. And so I had recreated it in Flash as a way to learn Flash. Just be like, here's a thing that's not super big scale. I'm sure I can recreate it. It's not very complicated logic-wise. Graphics-wise, not that complicated. I can just scan it for the most part. So I sent all that stuff. Like, these are the kind of things I've been making. And here's my other artwork and all these other learning modules, right? Long story short, they wanted somebody local, but finally they were like, if the ask is somebody who could just do everything, program it, put it together, make the website, or not the website, the stuff around the Flash thing, and just make me a little experience. But they were like, all right, fine, we'll hire you, but you'll have to come here. And it's so funny post-COVID now, we all know it's so flexible now to work from anywhere, but pre-COVID, you better work at the office, right? They're not doing anything remote.
Yeah.
So they're like, so why don't you come up here to Redwood Shores, so right near Foster City. We'll put you up in one of our EA apartments. They had like fully furnished apartments at the time. And we'll put you up for a couple months. You make it this Flash game, and then that's it. And so then I locked my apartment, packed my car, drove up. And I remember that to me is a big turning point in my life, right? That's one of those before and afters where it's cliche to say like you're being brought up to the majors and all this other stuff, right? It wasn't a full game, experience. I wasn't in a game team,
right.
But I knew at that point I was going to hold on to that fucking Bronco and make a career out of it, right? Because I knew they could fire me in 3 months, and I'm going to go back and put in my resume that I work for Electronic Arts and I made a game, and please hire me. Like I knew that at that point I was going to take that opportunity, right, and run with it. And so I got hired. It was this contract job for Max's web team. They wanted one game at first, and then I ended up making these 2 little games. One's like a little sticker book thing, and the other one was I made a finger dart thing. And it was great because they were like, do whatever, just make us some games. The concept, by the way, was in The Sims 2, when you were playing the actual Sims 2 game, you could go through a career, you could use a computer, and they were going to have these 2 URLs. There were like funny URLs, llamas are an inside joke in The Sims and Max's. And so there was like, I forget the URLs at this point, but it was like, do you think you're a llama or something like that? And so my manager, the manager there at the time, Carol Shaw for the Maxis web team, was like, "Did you register these URLs?" And they're like, "No." She's like, so she went register them, and like, we should point to something fun, right? So if somebody happens to type it in, it'll be a nice like meta Easter egg, right? And so that's why she hired me, right? To make these two little games. And I got along really well with her, with the team. They wanted to do other Flash-based stuff on the web, on the Maxis website. And they're like, "We'll just hire you. We'll hire you full time to be on the web team." I'm like, "Great, I'll take it. You know, yes. Anytime I haven't been fired yet, great. I'm gonna put that on my resume. I was there 5 months. I was there 6 months.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you can kind of catch yourself in the moment after the fact of realizing that you're in a really transitional period of time for yourself, and that you kind of know that what you're doing now is going to lead to the success of what you're doing later. Were you on the web team for the majority of your time at EA, or did you transfer over to the main game?
I transferred quick, very quick. Yeah. I was there only 3. So that was the other thing that I got lucky was, at the time, everything that was Sims console based, they had a Flash interpreter for the UI layer. So they needed Flash engineers. So as soon as I got it, I guess it was luck after luck. You know, what is like being prepared, luck favors the prepared, right? Like you're just working and working and working, thinking like, as soon as there's a hook, I'm hooking onto this thing, right? And I'll be able to show something, right? And so they needed somebody who could make Flash code and do the art for the UI layer of all their console games. So I was on the web team for probably 3 months, right? Total. You make a couple of Flash games, a couple of Flash experiences, a Flash navigation bar. And I remember somebody coming by and then they're like, you do Flash? And they're like, all right. And so they just immediately had me go and interview with the web team, the console team. And then it was just a transfer over. And then there you go. Like, you go from like, technically I made a game for Maxis, EA, right? Hey, technically I made 2 Flash games, you know, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm on the console team, you know, for an actual console game, right? So it was I couldn't believe it, right? Like that. Again, you dream of what the games are going to be like. Plus, by the way, like how lucky it was that it was at EA for The Sims, right? That's a massive AAA, world-known. Walking through those doors that first day, I just couldn't believe it, right? You landed all your all your hopes and dreams, right? Because it's a very impressive, you know, it's their
the mothership, the main campus,
main campus, right, for EA. So it's beautifully decorated, beautiful campus. You walk into the doors, decorating, and you're like, Carol walked down. She's like, yeah, you're
full gym, basketball court, 2 different cafeterias. Now there's a Starbucks there. There used to be a library there, company store, secret bar. Huge field that you can play soccer on, like 3 different main buildings.
It's everything we all think that the video game industry is like before you join it. It's this beautiful campus. It's a sunny, beautiful California day. A bunch of smart people. They give you a desk. They tell you to go make whatever game you want. You finish a couple of them. They give you the next assignment. Like the first 6 months, I couldn't have been lucky, and I knew how lucky I was, right? And every time I was thinking, again, if I go to the console team and they think this guy is terrible and they fire me, and I was there 5 months at Maxis, you know, making console games. You just don't know, you know. You want to have you need to have that sense of like, you have to be aware of how lucky you are and how much you still have to work, right, for to capitalize on that luck, right, and to make something.
Nothing's guaranteed. Working on The Sims was actually my very first title as well. We worked on it was initially called Sims for Laptop, or like Sims Laptop version, and they kind of pivoted last second and they changed it to like like Riley Stories or whatever. It was like this weird narrative version of The Sims that could run on laptops. So that was the first thing I worked on. I also worked on Sims 2 Pets and Sims 2 Seasons as well. So
I vaguely remember those products where they were like, "Hey, can it be performant enough to run on laptops?" Because at the time, laptops can run games, and so and it was still on the CD, right? You would get them, you install them from the CD run. Yeah, that's great. What year? What year did you start?
2006.
Mm-hmm. So not that. I mean, I was there 2004, so a couple years.
Yeah, we started around the same time, but we were different buildings, which I didn't actually meet you until we both worked at Zynga. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I'm curious because you were at EA for quite some time, for almost 7 years and change.
Yeah.
What are some of the toughest lessons or some of the most important lessons that you learned while you're at your time during EA? Beyond being thankful for realizing.
Well, I mean, the same lesson of yeah. I mean, you're thankful, but you also like. Just that hard work. I mean, it's a little cliche and a little high level, right? But like that, you're just learning. You're trying to make something great at the moment, but you're also just trying to learn, like very hands-on, tactical, day-to-day work of like making and producing and changing and prioritizing and all that stuff. I think that there was a lot of lessons learned, right? I mean, I can go on about all those little tiny things that you learn about making games. But high level, I think the thing that stood out the most was what I was mentioning earlier about, you can do it yourself. And you can have a vision of what that should be or could be, but you have to be able to take a step back. You're working with a team. You're working with other talented people. There's priorities, and so the single biggest thing that you can have at the time is to be a good team member. You have this weird impression when you get into games. Maybe it happens in other industries that somebody's going to be like, "Oh, Rodrigo made that UI." Or they designed that thing. It's like nobody's putting your name on anything. Nobody remembers you at all. Your team's going to remember you, and they want to remember that you were you're able to get things done for collectively. Like so, sometimes that's a little bit of we got to do it this way. We got to push for quality, and sometimes it's to just get it done and get out the door, and not necessarily spin on it. So there's a little bit of back and forth there. And plus, all the other stuff about working anywhere, about politics and people and diplomacy across people. You learn a lot about crunch. You learn about video game crunch, and there's time. I mean, in hindsight, you realize that there's times in your life you can actually do that, and there's other times that you can't or shouldn't anyway. But those are the bigger things, right? It's like basically how to make these. It was a lot of foundational stuff about how do you make what is essentially a bit of art and entertainment and a passion project, but with that many people, each with their own view into it and priorities and expectations and wants, whatever. So there's a lot of moving around and going, here's what I need and want, but what is the next person over? And so the UI part of things, so I went from being an engineer on the UI team to prototyping a lot of the UI, and then it became the UI. So I ultimately was doing the UI design for Sims 3. And there's a lot of lessons learned there about the priority holistically for the team, right, should be this, and that might not be the highest priority for art or for engineering, but how do you get everybody to understand that yes, art needs these things, and we're going to try to get art these things, but the game, the project, the timeline, this is the highest priority, and art needs to help with that priority, right? There's a lot of that. But yeah, to say nothing like the foundational stuff of like alpha and beta, and we're making gigantic games.
Yeah,
and lots of big features within those games. So there was a lot to learn there.
Yeah, the adage of if you want to go fast, go by yourself, and if you want to go far, go with friends.
Yeah.
I think that's really fitting in the games industry for sure. So as mentioned, after a long stint at EA, you left to go join Zynga, which is where I met you. I very much had a distinct impression of Zynga when I first joined. So I'm curious, coming from AAA into Zynga, which was a startup, which was more focused on Flash, Facebook games at the time, than later mobile games. What did you think of the company when you first joined compared to once you're in the trenches actually making stuff?
Well, I joined it at a time that I was looking for something different. I wanted to. I had been wanting to move into game design, which I had at The Sims, but it was difficult to, I think, really make strides in applied learnings about design for many reasons. Either sometimes a product doesn't need a lot of, The Sims is The Sims, right? You don't need a lot of innovation. There's already people with those jobs. A lot of the lateral moves that I made, I think, in my career during Maxis, I was very lucky that they let me do it. Right, I went from an engineer to UI designer to game designer, and you're taking a step down, right? I mean, you're like, I've gotten this good at engineering. Well, you're not that good at UI, and then you get that good at UI, and you're like, well, you're not that good at game design. So I think there was a lot of back and forth of like, imperceptions about what I had been doing, whatever, that I felt like I needed a clean break. At the tail end of me being at EA, they wanted me to do a lot of downloadable tools and web stuff, and I was like, this is not the game design either, and that's not the stuff I want to be doing anyway. And then the Zynga opportunity came up, and it just felt new. I mean, they were doing things differently. There were smaller teams, right? At least on the website. So there was a lot of these bigger, or there were starting to be bigger Flash Facebook games at the time, but they wanted to do the mobile stuff, and it seemed like smaller projects. The mobile projects felt smaller, and there was a lot of the economic model that everybody was trying to figure out. Like, you don't pay for the game, there's what we now call free to play, but like, right. There was a lot of that trying to be figured out. So my impression was that it felt great to be somewhere new again after 6 years, right, in one place and in one company, and have the chance to start new with a new perspective on things. And at the time, Zynga felt they were on a track to success. I mean, they were doing great. They were in the old, they call it the chip factory. Like, it literally used to be a chip factory in Trailville, and they had just moved to this building. I forget if they had bought it at the time, but that big iconic Zynga building, they had just bought.
The 63,000 old Sega building, yeah.
Yeah, so, but the old, like, Sega was upstairs building, right? Now, they bought the entire thing, and they started, like, whoever was still there, they either kicked them out or, like, they were now their tenants, right? So they were on a huge trajectory. And so there was a lot to learn about that model, and now having to work with PMs, so project, I forget, is it project managers or program
product managers, yeah.
Thank you. Product managers about, analytics and what the numbers say about this, and so it was exciting, but there was also this feeling of you didn't know who had the answers, and there was a lot of people claiming to have the answers and being super smart, and it also felt like when people glob to a new technology or industry or whatever, and all of a sudden there's these experts, right, about it, and you're like, maybe they're experts at it. I don't quite get it yet. I'm still trying to figure it out. And again, with hindsight, you're like, there's some people that were getting parts of it and not getting parts of it, but sometimes some of those product management meetings were intense. Why are you not talking about this? And it felt very corporate-y, people trying to get up up the ladder a bit,
Yeah.
while at the same time, a lot of people from the game industry genuinely trying to come in and make some cool, innovative stuff. So that was the biggest feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a clash between people that wanted to make games and MBAs fresh out of college trying to ladder jump for sure.
That's a more succinct way of putting it.
Well, my not being the one who's talking means I can sit here and listen and try to summarize what you're saying. Yeah, exactly. So I'm here for you, sir. I'm here for you. So you worked on two pretty significant games in the history of Zynga, Dream Zoo and Running with Friends, which is my personal favorite, which is around the time of when Temple Run? Yeah, Temple Run, right? Where there was a lot of endless runner games that were happening, and Running with Friends was a little bit of a fast follow of that, but still, I think your team and you made a really interesting spin on it, which is like the running of the bulls in Spain, which was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Can you share any challenges or any learnings that you had while making either of those games?
Well, Dreams, it was a really, really tough game to make. Mostly because, again, or maybe related to what I was saying earlier, the expectations of scope was all sorts of weird at the time. Like coming in being like, hey, let's make a small game and let's try it out and see what it does, versus some executive sponsor or some just higher up person coming in and saying, this is going to be now this on the tech side, on the team side, on the revenue side, etc. And so I think for me, Dreams It was one of those things where we were trying to make a really charming game and get some learning from it, and somebody tried to make it as a massive hit. And that was probably one of the most challenging projects I've ever been on, as far as the time that was being requested of us. It was very crunchy, and it was difficult because that's when the passion met the ask that can happen in games a lot, right? To be like, is this worth it? I thought we were just making something this size or this fun, and now I'm not having fun, and I'm just working very long hours on something that's I didn't think was that big, right? So there's Dreams there, and I think that might be the trailer. I think seeing some of the gameplay might be interesting. Also, at the time, I'm not sure how much they are now, but Zynga was very unapologetically a fast follow. They didn't mind fast follows. In fact, they felt that was a way to win, was find best in class. This is literally what they call it, best in class game mechanics, and just wrap it around our learning, like how much we know about making successful free-to-play games. So yeah, I mean that was challenging to work on under those conditions, but in retrospect, it forced me to grok free-to-play, and it took a long time for me to grok through free-to-play. And I didn't realize. I thought it was like, yeah, I know game design, I know games. Now we're selling them this way. Sure, let's do it. I went through Dream Zoo, Running with Friends, another prototype that never got made, my own 2 games. It wasn't until I got the Kixeye that I was starting to grok it, and then I was able to identify people coming in, industry veterans, right? And be able to say, like, I know how to make games. And then you're like, oh, no, he doesn't get free to play. Or he or she doesn't get free to play.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to work for a free to play thing. Like, it's a complete, like, you're embedding, or you have to embed the monetization model in your game design, right? It has to be a win-win for me and the player that we're having these little microtransactions. If it's not, then it's not a fun game. Then it's this thing that it helped me learn those things, right? Because to a certain degree, you go through emotions when you don't rock those things, and you're putting in this mechanic, and you're like, all right, sure, and then this other mechanic, you're like, I think that'll be good. there's the other mechanics I wish I would have championed more. I pitched at Dream Zoo that the animals you found, I was like, Magic has these packs. You buy a pack, you don't know what you're gonna get. Some are rares. We should just be selling, as part of it, these packs. So
Right.
And that was kind of shot down for various reasons. Well, security doesn't want to deal with like having to, because I was like, you should get them. You should be able to trade them with your friends, right? It should be like almost like a card game with these little animals. Now I would have pushed on a lot of that stuff more. But again, you just didn't know what you didn't know, right? Like there's some instincts that might have been right, a lot of instincts that were wrong, and it just takes time to be making games on that. And then see what's successful and what's not until you go, oh, wait, that's why that wasn't successful. Or I should have tried this thing.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020, but you of course realize it after the fact of like what you should have done differently. But you kind of skipped ahead a little bit talking about Kixeye. But I actually want to talk about what you did in between Zynga and Kixeye, which is you left Zynga for a little bit and you took some time off, and then later you started Prisma Studios. Mm-hmm. and created Ollie and Flip with your good friend Glenn Song. And I also joined on as a 10th as well for a hot minute. Mm-hmm. So you made Ollie and Flip together. Can you explain all the things that that you had to teach yourself to help finish that game? Because it was just you and Glenn for Ollie and Flip. And the other derivative versions of Ollie and Flip we
had Toodles Toboggan was the other one that we made.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But for Ollie and Flip, you really had to wear so many different hats as an indie dev. So can you talk about like your process of like all the things you had to handle or like get a hold of?
It's everything, every single thing, right? Art, concepting art, in-game, temp assets, final assets, texturing, animation, controllers, controller code, level design, UI design, UI art, sound effects, sound effect recording, fonts, font licensing, music, writing, web pages, marketing, press kits, LLC considerations. It was every single thing. And there's a lot to learn. You notice there the little shadow that took us a long time to figure out how to make it look to predict where you're going to land, right? And so we had this UI element, we had this other thing until it became this thing. It's like, oh, it should just be their shadow. To get to that point is surprising. It just takes a surprising amount of time, right? The look and feel of the controls, just so that somebody goes, oh yeah, that's normal. It's an insane amount of work. Yeah. So it's everything. All those, we made all those, all that stuff. The logo, picking the name of the company, like it's everything. So it taught me a lot about how much we take for granted being able to toss something over a wall, to marketing, to engineering, to product management, to whatever. Doing the schedule, how are you gonna, how do you prioritize? What's a backlog of stuff? Like it's all of that. At a small scale, though, when it's two people, it's everything. So you take it for granted all those jobs. You grok those jobs now more fully because you lived that job, and then you realize how much the other stuff's not getting done. The stuff that you could do in parallel, how hugely beneficial that is, even though it can be very inefficient if you're not managing it correctly. How much time that takes. So it was a huge learning. I have these mixed feelings about Prisma Wave and those games because they're failures, right? There's something that was yours and they failed. And so there's a mixed feeling of embarrassment, about it. I mean, you personally feel that way, but also this gratitude of like how much I learned. I would not be as good as I am at my job right now as an executive producer, right? Like, if you don't hands-on go through something like that, because you learn from that failure. You're like, I did all this stuff. How much of that was going through the motions of like, that's what you're supposed to do, versus this is the best way to do that art, that music, that coding, that project management. You learn a ton about how to prioritize what is essentially, I don't care how big the game team size is, every game project is war theater, right? you're mobilizing all sorts of different types of units in hierarchy towards a common goal, meeting resistances along the way. It's logistically it's a tough thing, and what has to come out the other end as victory, it's a fun game. There's a bit of entertainment, which is weird, right? It gives you that back and forth. And when I became a producer, that's the mindset that it gave me, right? Which is what the producer needs to have, is the producer being that person that's able to be between the efficiency of the team and the effectiveness of the product. And those two things constantly balance off of each other. And at the end of the day, no matter what you did, no matter how hard you worked, no matter what you learned, that game, if it's not a hit, it's a failure. Now, you learned a lot, but it's a failure, right? You're aiming, it's just like anything else. If I'm training to be a professional football player, I'm trying to win the Super Bowl. I may not win the Super Bowl every year, but that's the goal, right? The goal is to go win the Super Bowl. So if every year you're not winning the Super Bowl, you're learning a ton, you're whatever, but you're not winning the Super Bowl, right? So until you're making a hit game, and that's what I learned the most there. The other big lesson that I had from that place, and I've said this repeatedly to multiple people since, I should have made a passion project. And to a certain degree, I did. The passion was, I want to make my own game company, do something for myself, by myself. And I did that, and I accomplished it before having kids. Great. But ultimately, I think I wish I would have made something for me, right? I was trying to make something that would be successful in the abstract. Somebody would like it. And, I liked a lot of it, but
yeah, it was inspired by Ski Free. Well, I mean, I guess I'm curious. I mean, unless it's something you still want to pitch at some point, what passion project did you want to make, or do you want to just hold that close to the vest?
No, I mean, I don't mind sharing. It's not a particular thing. I think it would have been just more like, just be okay that it wouldn't have been commercially successful. It's tough to say that because I just said that that's the goal, right? You're trying to make a hit game. I guess what I'm saying is, in any other big team, when you get hired at EA to go make The Sims or go make Battlefield or whatever, unless you're a 100% hardcore dedicated fan of that thing, you're having to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? What does a Sims player want? And so I was building that muscle for a long time of like, yes, I like The Sims, but it's not my number one favorite game of all time. Would Dream Zoo have been the game I would have gone and said, that's my dream job? No. I was trying to make the best mobile zoo game. I was trying to make the best mobile endless runner. And I think that's what happened to me by the time I got here. You're in that mindset of like, all right, what audience am I going for and what do they want? And that was a missed opportunity in hindsight of like, you're the audience. Because guess what? You don't have a marketing team. You don't have a PR team. You don't have a CI, customer insights team. You are the customer. If you make a game that you would go at the scale of it, at the scope of it, that's what I want to play. Then that's what you're going to learn a lot more of making a piece of entertainment for going, for understanding an audience of one. I think that's the main thing. So it would have been something like a little tiny adventure RPG, something like that. There would have been more. items to collect and a tiny bit of narrative along the way, but nothing too crazy like artsy. Just more like, I just want to run around a dungeon and collect some cool stuff and loot, and if I can do that and not have to think about it much on my phone, I would have loved that. And that's what I should have made. And I had a lot of designs on paper about games like that. It's tough to scope those kind of games, and so it's fine to take a step back. But any one of those things where I'm like, this is a game for me, and that's okay. That's what I wish I would have done.
Right on. So folding out of the experience of Prisma Wave and having those games not be successful in the way that you wanted to, and as you mentioned, just learning a ton and realizing that you had to wear the hats of all those different roles. You went over to, after Kixeye, you went over to Humble Bundle. Mm-hmm. Can you explain how things kind of went full circle of being in indie dev to working at Humble Bundle and then helping out other indie devs?
Indie dev, yeah.
Literally be
basically exactly what I was saying. And then Kixeye was also like mid-core free-to-play, right? So Zynga was very casual free-to-play. Then I tried to do casual free-to-play, but as a small scope. And then I did mid-core free-to-play with, again, games that I was a lead designer on this game that I don't particularly like RTSs. So at Humble, to go back to that scope of things and that monetization model, which is literally convince somebody to pay something up front, the end. I don't care if they play some more. It was a combination of both, of saying, hey, being able to consult games that way, be like, hey, watch out for this, watch out for that. It allowed me to set up a framework where we could, at scale, track a lot of games and go, if nothing else, because you're not going to be able to embed yourself in every single one of those games and look at their tasks and whatever. It's like, at a high level, what's the lightest touch we can do to measure the health of these things and make sure that in a portfolio they're doing okay, and which ones I need to deep dive on, whatever. And at the same time, one of the things we established there, and one of the things I kept saying internally into developers is, we're here to be a partner to you and a consultant to you. The creative decisions are on you. Right? We're not going to come in as a publisher and be like, you have to put in multiplayer or whatever. Right? It was more like, we're going to come in as a consultant, tell you, we think that you should cut this or add these things, or it's too short, or whatever. But ultimately, take that and make an informed decision based on that for your game, for your product. Because ultimately, you should be the creator and try to make the best product you're trying to make. So I think that was the main thing, like being able to bring to them a lot of the best practices of just the meat and potatoes of making games. Right, the frameworks that work well, like why you don't work on this stuff until you're done with this stuff, and all that other stuff, while at the same time allowing them to keep an eye on the vision that you can lose track of, especially when it's by yourself. One of the other things that I learned a lot about making my own game is it's supremely difficult to be in the trenches and then see the vision,
the forest and the trees.
It's very difficult. You have to. That's a big muscle to exercise, and most people can't do it. You're too entrenched. And so what we could provide to them is, I'm just as invested in the success of your game as you are, but I'm taking a step back on purpose so that I can give you that objective feedback. Right? It's like, I know you really are on this part of it, but you cannot lose sight of this part of it. Ultimately, the choice is yours, but I'm here as your advocate, as your partner, telling you, don't forget about this. So that was the main thing. And then being able to come back to just a game. I mean, there's a lot of free-to-play stuff that is interesting. It's here to stay for many reasons, but even just being able to make a bespoke game, buy it or don't, then if you buy it, play it, was really refreshing. While at the same time, trying to bring some of the learnings from free to play, right? Like the idea that free to play is very focused on making sure that people enjoy the game for a long time and understand it right away. And so all these things, it's like, yeah, you convince somebody to give you $20 for your game, but if they didn't play it for a while, it's harder to see that you're not as big a success as you could have been, because that one person bought it, but the next person didn't, because nobody else is talking about your game a month later. Nobody's streaming it and nobody's talking about it, and so you're losing the tail of your sales for the same reasons that free to play tries to solve, which is there's a value prop that I'm trying to give you in this game. And you need to be able to say, wow, that was worth $20. Just as much as you need to be able to say, wow, that was worth $1, right? And now I'm going to keep playing. Like, you're always making that value prop to people. And so being able to bring that back to indie space was great.
Nice. Is there any other things that indie devs should know about Humble Bundle, and why they might want to partner with them and or get involved with them, or just buy from them, period?
Buy from Humble Bundle?
Yeah, or just why is Humble Bundle an awesome company? Because I think everybody that knows Humble Bundle typically just knows them as like a game bundle company and not really a publisher. I guess. Yeah. What other things should people know about Humble Bundle, as you being an actual employee from them?
They were a really great group of people, really focused on balancing work and business, charity and growth. Right? It was a really nicely well balanced company. It was challenging to get people to understand that we were now starting to publish games. Although now that's starting to change, there was a lot of like, we would see it, right? People saying like, "Whoa, Humble's on a streak!" Like that indie game and that indie game and that indie game. So yeah, I just think it does a great job of balancing the business and the humanity of stuff, right? Of we're still a very diverse group of people, trying to really make sure you're lifting up voices that are more diverse. But you're still trying to make a commercially successful product. Right? I'm trying to make sure that, Unpacking or Temtem or whatever sells a lot of copies, because that people vote with their wallets, right? That was a great game. I'm going to recommend it again.
Yeah.
So I like that a lot about the company.
Was there any specific games you're really proud of to help get over the finish line during your time there?
Not one in particular. I mean, it's tough because it's like, again, I feel like I was a consultant to all of them. I was not embedded making the game, so I wouldn't want to take anything from the creatives, right? Like, but I mean, the fact that I got to play Unpacking with my son a year or two before it came out, and show him how great that one was. Unsighted was a really great game made by a really great team out of Brazil. One of our producers did some magnificent stuff, getting Project Wingman at the door at the right time. There was a lot of games that we helped just make sure that they would just come out. It's tough to finish a project, a creative project, but ultimately you want to be like, this is what this game is going to be, and we should just get out there, see what it does, learn from it, and move on to the next one. So I think just across the board, the fact that we were able to get a lot of them come out on time while still to quality, that was the biggest thing that I think as a publisher we were trying to do, because we weren't trying to do like, here's the kind of game, or here's what kind of ending, or here's the kind of whatever. It's more like the discipline that you need to apply to something like this to actually finish and come out and learn and sell copies and figure out what the critics want. Like, video games are a very, very cool balance of the practical and the creative. You have to be able to balance both. And so anything that we were able to infuse to them as far as the practical, that was the biggest thing that I'm proud of. Because then the actual games themselves, that was just all them, right? they
Right.
pitched a great game and they made a great game.
Awesome. So you're currently Netflix games right now, and you obviously can't talk about anything that you're working on. So instead, I will throw a final softball question at you, and it's very serious. Are you ready?
Yes, very serious.
Who is your favorite Masters of the Universe character and or toy, and why?
Just well, either Battle Damage He-Man or just original He-Man. I mean, Moss Man is up there too, because I remember having Moss Man. But I would guess the original He-Man, and I have a very clear memory of He-Man or Masters of the Universe coming out in Mexico and getting that. It was Transformers and He-Man was coming out around the same time. So I was very nostalgic for that era, and seeing that first one was a huge deal. I don't know why. Like you go back and look at it, you're like, that was a great toy, but why what made such an impact to kids at the time? You're like, oh my god, this is way different than anything that's out there. Seeing that first one was very cool.
Yeah, it's funny because people from our generation, like growing up as a kid, you don't realize like how much like Conan saturation was happening around that time of like the really early 80s. Of obviously He-Man is a ripoff of Conan, but there's just so much of that barbarian style that just leaked into He-Man, and just it's such an iconic design.
He-Man went all in. I think that was one of the things that made it so great. I mean, there was a lot of stuff at the time, to your point about Conan and stuff, but like it just went all in on like this dude is super strong, and there's crazy characters, and they have crazy names, and it's great. There's a castle, and it looks like a skull. I mean, just the proportions of He-Man are ridiculous. But I mean, same could be said when whatever Superman first showed up. Everybody's like, "What are you talking about?" And it just didn't care, right? It was like bright colors, great names. I just do it,
Amazing. All right, Rodrigo. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to plug before we leave? Social media sites, cool things happening in your life, sage advice or words?
No, okay. I have nothing to plug. I'm on Twitter, and I mostly lurk. I've never understood social media from a attention getting point of view. So no, I have nothing to plug. But if for some reason anybody wants to reach out and ask a question, whatever, Twitter's probably the best way.
Cool. Where on Twitter specifically can they find you?
I don't know. Go to Alta Vista and.
All right, I'll put it in the description later.
It's Spyro, but yeah, you can put it on there as well.
Okay. All right. Again, Rodrigo, thank you so much for your time. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.